Good Friday morning, friends. Welcome back for another episode of the Finding God in the Dark podcast. My name is Don,
My name is Jonathan.
and this week we are going to continue our quest on working our way through the entire series, The Chosen, which can be found on Amazon Prime. It is from Angel Studios. We have talked about seasons one and two up to this point. We are going to get to season five eventually, which is, as I've mentioned previously, is coming out on, I believe it'll be on Prime as well,
Yeah,
June 15th. Um, we also, I just a heads up before we get into this discussion, some things that we do have in the pipeline. We have recorded an episode of the podcast with all three of us in one room together,
yeah.
which was fun and interesting. That I am working on the edit as we speak. And we're also waiting for Evan to watch a film that we have gone and seen that we'd like to talk about together. And we have other films that we've discussed. Aside from finishing out The Chosen, we do want to do a film called The Way, which we talked about a little bit before. So we have some stuff coming up. If any of that is of interest to you, please subscribe and follow along, and we will get to those things at some point this summer. We are trying to pre-record some stuff as well so that we won't miss a week when one of us is away on vacation.
Yeah.
That all being said, let's talk about season three of The Chosen. What did you like? How this is how we're doing it, right? What did you like? What did you not like?
Yeah.
Um,
If there's
so,
an episode that you want to talk about, yeah.
well, I just mentioned this before we started recording. My admission up front, I didn't quite get through the whole season. Um,
Shame,
I
shame.
know, right? I didn't watch the film that Evan picked, and I didn't get through the whole season here.
Man, you're slacking. You're
Uh,
slacking.
well, I'm gonna blame it on the Phillies. Um,
Sure.
because I get home at night, I have my dinner, and then I sit there and like the Phillies game's on, put that. Anyway, um, I did get through episode five, and I thought episode five was great of this season. Episode five was the healing of the woman who was bleeding
Yeah.
and the resurrection of the girl who had died.
Yeah.
And then the way that particularly I love the way that he dealt with the Pharisees after the fact, who said, "You're now ritually unclean. You have to be," and he went, "Oh, you'll write a letter." It's almost, I mean, he didn't say it, but I'm thinking it. Oh, I'm so scared. You're going to write a letter.
Yeah.
But anyway, I know that you had some particular issues. And when I came across those things, we had discussed them before.
Yeah.
I saw exactly what you were talking about. So let's talk about the issues that you had.
Okay, I'll start with a more of a personal one, and I recognize the personal aspect of it, and I'm conscious of it. But the first one was it's been hinted at throughout the seasons about the fact that little James has a disability.
Right.
And the disciples in previous seasons had directly talked about, why do you think Jesus hasn't healed you? And in this season, I can't remember what episode it is. It's toward the
I think it
end
was
of,
three. I think it
okay,
was episode three.
it's at the end of one of the episodes that we think it's three. Um, and little James asks him, basically says, kind of out of frustration, why haven't you healed me? And Jesus does what in the Bibles Jesus always does, which is ask the person that's in front of him, do you want to be healed? And then he said, think about your answer because Jesus says, think about your answer because it will shape the rest of your life. And then he goes on to this thing about there may be thousands someday that can talk about me healing them, but you could tell the story of how God, I've used you to heal others, even in your disability. And that basically he's kind of arguing for that could be even a more powerful story. And then he even talks about, I would love to, I'd love to see you doing this. But then he goes, but don't worry, someday you will run like a gazelle, which is a reference to a psalm. and he's seems to be indicating that in heaven you won't have your disability, and it's only a matter of time. And so, as a person with a disability, it's important for me to unpack this. One, I recognize I'm what's called a lifer in the community. I was born with my disability, so I've always been disabled. And so I am very cognizant, especially as I get older, that there are people that acquire disabilities, and I try to give them grace when they struggle with their disability because I never had that experience. So I say this just as my personal opinion, although other people in the disability community struggle with Jesus as healer and how we use it. Um, I guess I would have preferred him kind of pushing back against little James about why do you think you need to be healed from your physical malady? Because when I've been as an adult, when people have come up to me and offered to pray for my healing, and yes, they have, um, I have said on a couple occasions now when people have done that, thank you for your prayers, but I don't need healing from that. That's not where I need healing. It's not saying I don't need healing. I do. I am broken and I need to be made whole, but I do not view my physical or my intellectual disability around learning disabilities as something I need to be healed from. And I guess I wish he could have had that space in the show, but I recognize that very few able-bodied people understand that distinction. And so I wasn't expecting that to show up. And then also, I've done a lot of research about, and I usually, when I talk about this at places, I try to raise this up, is that healer in the Jewish context at that time, they had a historical and societal function. And their function was to help people that couldn't easily navigate the bridge between insider, outsider, clean and unclean. The healer's job was to help them navigate that bridge back into the community. And I guess I would love to see any show or anything that talks about Jesus as healer to recognize that that is primarily what he's doing. He's not taking away a disability as much as he's helping someone re-access the community and help the community recognize they shouldn't have pushed this person out of the community. And that's really what healers did. But again, I don't expect that to show up in this show because very few people that I've encountered even know that historical dimension of what a healer was.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah,
And I'm, uniquely for you, obviously here. Um, the first part of that, what Jesus said,
yeah,
that, imagine what a witness you can
yeah,
be. Uh,
absolutely.
Does that bother you, or is it really just the second part, like, oh, well, eventually you'll be healed? Because when it got to that second part, that was
Yeah.
cringy for me.
Yes, I no, I didn't mind the first part at all because I do think that oftentimes God allows us to heal through our wounds. And so I felt like that's what he was communicating. And I didn't have a problem with the first part. The second part, though, again, that can put a lot of weight on somebody if they have a disability. And I guess I would have just preferred them not use that line. But again, I didn't
Right.
expect it not to come because I feel like, again, this is a blind spot a lot of people that are able-bodied, people that don't have disabilities, don't recognize the weight they put on with this language around someday you'll be healed or in heaven you won't, and how I would use it in terms of my situation is I don't know what it means. I've my entire life I've had my disabilities, so I don't know what it means to not have them and not be a person with a disability. So you're not giving me a huge relief when you say I won't have my disability because I don't know what that means because I've never experienced my life without it.
Yeah, we talked a little about this when we were together in Wildwood for annual conference that, you know, I have a term that I've used for
Yeah,
people who say those sort of things, oh, well, when you're in heaven you'll be healed, or when God took your baby away, your baby died early because God needed another angel. That's Those people are Christian terrorists. I
Yeah,
mean, that's just look, you're not thinking deeply here,
yeah,
okay? And you're certainly not thinking pastorally. Now, I
right.
don't expect everybody to think pastorally, but at least Christians ought to be able to say, this is a challenge that we don't have easy answers for,
Yeah.
you know?
And
So yeah.
yeah,
When like I said, when that scene came up and we had talked about it,
yeah,
and then the scene I saw it and the scene came up and I went, ooh.
yeah. Because again, it's just this isn't for everybody. There are people with disabilities that don't want their disabilities, and I don't judge them one way or the other. I really
Sure.
worked through that from my point of view. But there are people like myself who don't feel like that's an issue they need healing from. And so when you throw around healing and don't unpack it, you risk hurting a lot of people and alienating a lot of people from the community and from the grace of God, I think.
Yeah.
So
And there's another aspect to healing that we don't often talk about. We pray for people who are terminal in the hospital, and we pray for healing, but healing isn't always what we think it is,
yeah,
right?
that's the other piece of this is sometimes what we need healing from is not what we realize we need healing from.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, good stuff. I'm glad you brought that up because yeah, I saw it and went, that one's not good. So what else did you have?
Yeah, this season was the one I had the biggest problems with of episodes or their choices. And the other thing I wanted to mention was this is a pet peeve of mine,
Oh
but
yeah, I remember. Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
but in Luke, there is a in Luke the first. In fact, I think it's the first time Jesus speaks. If it isn't the first time Jesus speaks, it's the first time he preaches or does anything in kind of his ministerial fashion, and he goes to his hometown's synagogue in Nazareth, and he, like any male who's been bar mitzvahed, has the right to read the scroll and then reflect on what he read. And we see him do that. He chooses. It appears to be he chooses the Isaiah scroll. He reads the passage where Isaiah talks about, "I have been the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bring good news to the poor, a recovery of sight to the blind, set the prisoners and the oppressed free, and bring about the year of the Lord's favor." And then he sets down, which is again a common way to teach at that time. You would set down, and the teacher would then give his sermon or reflection. He sets down and says, "In your hearing, this has been fulfilled." And the town people get upset because
Doesn't he
they,
say something like that time is now, right?
yes, yeah, he
Yeah.
said, yeah, he said, "In your hearing, this has been fulfilled," or something to that effect. And that's all he says for his sermon. And then people get bothered by the fact he's saying this, and then he adds in a little bit more dimension of, "But you're not going to be a part of this. You're not going to be a part of this good news because you would not receive," basically saying you would not receive me. And then he gives a couple examples in the Hebrew scriptures of times where prophets had to go outside of Israel to be heard or to be served or be taken care of. And the passage ends with the people in the synagogue trying to throw him off a cliff and kill him. And the text ends really weirdly where he just walks through them. Basically, just like it, and what concerned me was in the chosen episode, what he does is he reads Isaiah, he sets down, he says the line about this being fulfilled, and then he basically goes, "Well, what I'm really doing is spiritual things." and 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 it's like, no, that's not what the text says at all. And again, I think one of the things that really bothers me is the year of the Lord's favor is also known as the year of Jubilee. And it's mentioned in Leviticus 25, maybe 26. I can't remember which chapter right now. I think it's 26 when I think about it. But anyway, it was supposed to be a time every 50 years, the people of Israel were to forgive all the debts in the community. They were supposed to not plant or sow crops. They were supposed to free any slave that they owned or had, and they were supposed to give back the land that they had to the original owners. Now, every 7 years, a year of Sabbath was supposed to happen, where the first three things were done. You were supposed to not plant or sow or reap crops. You were not supposed to. You were supposed to forgive all debts you owned, and you were supposed to free your slaves. But in the year of Jubilee, you're supposed to do the first three and give back any land you owned to the original owners. Now, this is a radical concept. It may be one of the most radical concepts in the Bible, and it creates this idea that the God of Israel, our God, the God we worship, does not want his people to face generational poverty. Because if every 7 years you're forgiving debts, if every 50 years you're giving back land to the original owner, then no one is going to be generationally poor for generation upon generation upon generation. It's just not going to happen. And that's a radically powerful idea, I believe. And unfortunately, the chosen chose to do what most pastors do is they step way back from there and don't talk about Jesus wanting economic justice and equality in terms of economic freedom and stability. And I think that's a huge mistake. I just do.
And I would, I think I can go with you on this insofar as if it was intended to be purely spiritual, it
Yeah.
would have been in John's gospel and
Yeah.
not Luke's,
Yes.
right?
And again, when I preach about this, I point out that Luke goes out of his way to talk about poverty a lot and talk about that Jesus believes he's bringing good news to the poor, not just good news to the poor in spirit, as Matthew puts it. Or the fact that Luke in Acts, because Luke writes Acts, he talks about twice, he basically says that the community of faith held everything in common and would sell things as people had needs so that nobody in the community was of need. And those things are not just spiritual things, they're economic things. And we need to, I think, take them seriously as Christians.
Hard to argue with that. And I think, like I said, if it were intended to be purely spiritual, it wouldn't have been in Luke.
No.
Um, you
Uh,
know,
yeah.
certainly. Uh, what did you find anything you liked in this season?
Yes, I did. I
Okay,
did.
good.
I still, again, I think overall this show does a pretty good job.
Yeah.
Um, I think I really liked, I don't know how you feel, but as a pastor dealing with sometimes the frustration of feeling like you're called, but you sometimes put up with stuff you wish you didn't have to put up with. I really liked,
No.
yeah, I know,
Oh, come on.
I know.
That all the time.
I really liked you probably haven't seen them, but the latter episodes that deal with um, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, sorry, but
Okay.
um,
I've read the book that
okay.
it's based on, so
Oh yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So, well, Peter's wife has a miscarriage,
Mhm.
and the last couple episodes, that's not in the Bible. We get a
Right.
reference that he's married, but we don't get any feedback about who she was.
Right.
There is, I didn't realize this until looking it up. There is legends around her that she existed and it kind of ancient tales of what she did, but they're not in the Bible. Um, but in the show, she has a miscarriage, and as you can imagine, she and Peter struggle with it. And Peter gets really angry at Jesus about why Jesus didn't tell him or why Jesus allowed the miscarriage to happen, or, and so basically, there's this scene where Jesus is preaching again now on a plane. So you get this sense that they're arguing that it's Luke has doesn't have the Sermon on the Mount; he has the Sermon on the Plain, and so I wonder if they were trying to kind of connect with that idea. And so you see some of that, and then that leads into the feeding of the 5,000. Um, and one of the disciples go, they keep noticing that Peter's angry, and then at one point they go, "What are you worried about?" And he goes, "I'm worried about him that he'll choose them." And then Jesus feeds them. He does the miracle. He starts feeding them. He's handing out food to them. And you see Peter throw the basket down at the end out of disgust. And then it leads right into the disciples rowing the boat across the Sea of Galilee, the storm, and then Jesus walking on water. It goes right into that story. And I really liked how they handled the idea that followers of Jesus can be frustrated by the fact that they don't feel like the miracles they see happening or the blessings they see happening to other people are happening to them. Because I think that's something as pastors, as I guess, as probably any disciple of Jesus, you feel that sometimes of why am I struggling with this when other people aren't? Why are you seemingly taking care of other people but not taking care of me? And I like the fact they had him struggle with that.
It's I think they've done a good job in really the entire series so far of rounding out the disciples,
Yeah,
because when you come to, if you only know the disciples from reading the scriptures,
yeah,
what you're getting are cardboard cutouts.
of course.
They're really like just iconic figures. We know Thomas as the doubter. We know
Yeah,
Peter as the overexcited one. We know,
yeah.
that sort of thing, and Judas as the betrayer, etc. In the show, I think they do a really good job of kind of giving these guys a backstory, and helping you to maybe understand their motivations a little more. So yeah, that idea right there plays into it.
Um,
So
did you see the little snippet of the older man giving Matthew his talits at the tax? Okay. So
maybe.
there's a scene where an older man comes to it's a flashback to when Matthew was working as a tax collector. And an older man comes and it's discovered that this older man has bought all of his children's debt even though he couldn't afford it. And so he's put all the tax burden on himself, and it's clear he's about to die, and he's kind of accepting the fact that he's going to be arrested, but he's going to take this burden on himself for his family. And Matthew's kind of blown away by this, and it starts to be a moment where you're starting to realize maybe this is why Jesus spoke to Matthew, or why Matthew connected with Jesus, because this guy starts to open up that idea of self-sacrifice and worrying about other people, not yourself. And before the gentleman leaves, he goes, "I do have something of great value." And Matthew's really excited, like, "Oh, I can sell it and I'll help you out and I'll pay off your debt." And it's the man's prayer talits. It's the cords that Jews use to remind themselves of the idea. They put it on their clothing to remind them of the idea that they're surrounded by the Word of God and they're surrounded by God's love. And it was just this really powerful scene. And then you later at the last episode, you see Matthew crying as he's using these things to pray. And I just love that moment of the fact that we are sometimes given the opportunity to, by how we live and how we love, we open up people to the possibility of encountering Christ and encountering God's love. I love that idea. And I thought that was a beautifully done scene.
We've To build off of that a little bit, we've mentioned this before. This show also does a great job of incorporating the Jewish faith, the
Yes.
Hebrew
Yeah.
faith, and ideas into an
Yeah.
understanding of what they mean in Christianity,
Yeah.
which I may have mentioned before. My first year seminary New Testament theology professor, Ian Scott, used to
Yeah.
say to us that you can't truly understand your Christian faith without having an appreciation for the faith of your Jewish brothers and sisters.
Yeah,
Um,
they celebrated Purim during this, which is a celebration of the remembrance of Esther and the
mhm.
troubles in Babylon. I mean, I really that's actually one of the highest marks I would give to the show is they really go out of their way to remind you these folks, including Jesus, was Jewish, and
Right.
they didn't throw away Judaism.
No, they did not.
Yeah,
And I think they also do a great job of building the relationship between Jesus and his mother.
yeah,
There was a whole you sort of this whole scene where he escaped the disciples and all the crowds, and he just kind of went home,
yeah,
and he just I need to sleep, and his mother fed him a meal, and she took care of him, and
yeah,
and it's like, yeah, you kind of, because we get such a rapid run through in the Gospels, you don't get all of this stuff. Now, obviously, it's, invented. We don't know that it's true.
yeah,
It's in a sense Hollywood, although I think it's more like Austin, Texas, but
yes,
um it is in that sense a fabrication.
yeah,
But I think, and again, we're going back to this idea. I think it's a great fabrication in that they honor the characters and they honor the story, and I don't think that, other than a couple of things we've quibbled about for sure, um,
yeah.
they're still doing so far a pretty good job
Oh
of
yeah.
of handling it, um, and doing it justice and
What's
honoring it.
what's the episode that you wanted to talk about? Did we talk about that enough?
Oh, I just loved episode 5. I thought, 5 was great. You had because in episode 5 you had those two like healing miracles.
Yeah,
And the one in particular, I don't know that I think they expounded on the idea of the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years.
yes,
A little more in the show than it is in the scripture, because in the
yeah,
scripture you only get that she was ritually unclean because she'd been bleeding,
yeah,
you know. Whereas they kind of draw this out. The two of the disciples found her ahead of time, and
yeah,
she knew that all she couldn't Jesus couldn't touch her because he'd be unclean, but if
yeah,
she could just touch the hem of his robe. And I'm like, okay, I know this story. And
yeah,
then that turns out to be a really, like
yeah,
this miraculous event. But he's on his way to go and heal this girl, well, to
yeah.
resuscitate, revive,
Right. The girl that
resurrect
had
this
died.
girl who had died, right?
Yeah, and again, that's actually that's one of the things I really thought was great. They actually have this woman touch his tallits. She touched his prayer, the things we talked about with Matthew,
Right.
the things at the edges of the garments.
The hem, the
Yeah,
fringes, yeah.
yeah. I love the fact that again they were right. That's what she touched in the story. That's what she touches. And again,
Mhm.
it brings out this deep religious Jewish character of who he was, who they were. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's no, it's that was a beautiful episode of kind of the power of how miracles can really open up people in amazing ways,
Yeah.
and how God's grace can really change people's lives.
It was another one of those scenes. There have been, a few scenes through the first 3 seasons that we've watched, where it brings me right up to, like, I'm going to cry in a second here.
Yeah,
My
yeah,
son's sitting in the room with me. He's going to
yeah,
look
yeah,
over at me and go, "Dad, you're crying."
yeah.
But that was that scene when he resurrected that girl,
Yeah.
because he, it was like so gentle and so
Yeah,
love,
that was
and
a
then he
beautiful
just
scene.
takes her hand and he leans in and he whispers in her ear, "Little lamb, wake up." And I was like, "Oh, come on, man."
Yeah, no, no, that episode was really well done.
Yeah.
I think most of this show is really well done, and I don't understand the anger I see sometimes on more conservative Christian YouTubers
Yeah.
around this show. I guess they're bothered by the fact they don't stay strictly with Bible, but to me, some of these things actually help you better understand what's going on.
Yeah. I think you're right. And maybe it is, and I'll just throw this out there because I don't know.
Yeah.
but is that sort of an anti-intellectual argument from the more conservative side?
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know. I think there's this idea we should just stay strictly with the Bible, and I get that. But we're so removed from that culture that I don't think you can really understand it unless you have some backstory. And I think in a lot of times that's what this show is trying to do.
yeah, yeah, and as we've said, fairly well.
Yeah.
I think they're doing it, they're accomplishing a lot of that fairly well.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see when we get to season 5
Yeah.
because these first 4 seasons were filmed in the US, as I understand.
Yes. And
And
mostly in
season
Texas.
5 was actually filmed in Holy Land. So I'm looking forward to that. Um, Other than that, I think we're getting a little close to time, so we're going to need to wrap up. As far as next week, I don't know. We're kind of playing it by ear right now, which is okay. No complaints about that at all. I think if folks are interested, we are gonna, we're gonna probably continue watching The Chosen.
Yeah.
If we're not making our way through it, like some of us have, we might shift gears to something else. And that also depends on if Evan gets to see the other film, because
Yeah.
I'm like you. I think that's really rich discussion material.
Yeah.
For those who haven't seen it, and we'll throw this out there. We're going to talk about the film that's in theaters right now called Sinners. Um, if you are interested in being ahead of the game on that when we talk about it, be aware it is rated R for very good
Good
reason.
reasons. Yes.
There is quite a lot of violence and sex in it, and it's not a kid's film.
Nope.
Uh, so, if that sort of thing bothers you, don't go see it.
Yeah.
But we found it to be really fascinating, and we do want to talk about it. So we'll see what we get to next week. But until then, friends, thank you for following on. Thank you for watching. I hope that you're getting as much out of this as we are, because I don't know, I have a blast doing this. Uh, so, friends, until next week, keep on finding God in the dark. We'll see you all again next Friday.
Bye.
Friends, thank you again for watching the Finding God in the Dark podcast. If you're finding these discussions helpful or meaningful in your Christian walk, then we'd invite you to go ahead and subscribe down below. Get more of this content. We publish every Friday morning at 10 a.m. And we're so glad that you can be with us and enjoy these discussions as well. Take care and God bless. Bye now.